Hey, welcome to the Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Caleb Teskey. Got another great guest for you this afternoon. Um, do want to do the usual housekeeping here, and I'm sorry I forgot to put Lester's picture up there. But if you didn't catch my interview with Lester Black, that was my most recent interview. He's the cannabis editor for sfgate.com, writing some really great stories out on the left coast there in the cannabis industry, as well as John Averill from the Roaring 420s Lounge in New York. And then we had Jamie Toth, and we're going to be talking about some of her information here tonight. We had Doc Ray from Doc Ray Genetics, another great interview there. And then Luke Steinke from Bird's Eye Botanicals. That was my 420 interview this year. First one, too. On Tuesday, coming up on the 7th, I got Drew Greco, who's out in Vegas, I believe. And boy, I've been dying to get someone from Nevada. Drew's going to be my first guest from Nevada. Then on Thursday, I got Corey Donahue. And I'm not exactly sure what we're going to get into yet, but me and Corey are going to have a great chat. I can guarantee you that. And then on Mother's Day, I got Gerald Kazmarek, who is a former police officer down in New Orleans, or I want to say Louisiana or something. I'm psyched to have Gerald on the show. Lucas Mason on Tuesday from Orem Labs, which is now out of business, but Luke's going to tell us his story. And then on the 16th, I got Ed Williams from Searchlight, New Mexico, who's been writing some great stories. And my guest tonight, guys, has been on the show before. He is the co-founder and CEO of Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs. He's a PhD chemist. Please welcome back Josh Swider. Josh, thanks for being here tonight, man.
How's it going, guys? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And since we already had you on, we don't need to do the 5-minute live story. So we can just jump right in here, Josh. And for the two people watching, I'll slap that banner up. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to chime in. Since the last time we spoke, I've seen your name popping up in a lot of media. And, I thought, hey, let's get Josh back on the show. And I will just jump right in here. The first story, and this is something we definitely talked about a little bit on our last interview. This is from Beard Bros Farms, and I've been talking to the Beard Bros too. They do some great work. But this story is entitled California Introduced a Method to Standardize THC Testing. It Didn't Work. I'd love to know sort of how you hooked up with these guys and a little bit about this story. And I do have a couple of questions in there.
Yeah, so just a little overview of the story. In California, cannabis testing has kind of lost the battle to THC inflation, especially in flower. Ever since 2020, approximately, it kind of just took off and escalated to then. The DCC had a law passed, and I think it was SB 544, that stated they needed to make a standardized method internally and then have all the labs use it. And that, I believe it was to combat the problem of potency inflation of flower. Years down the road, we pushed this down. The industry's fighting back on standardizing method. The method they originally put out didn't really work for every matrix they wanted to, and it got shut down after 3 comment periods, which was actually a lot, down to only flower and pre-rolls. A lot of people kind of didn't like the method. It's not financially doable in a lab. It costs a lot more money. It does create accurate answers. I'll say that. There's nothing wrong with the method. It's just not optimized as an analytical chemist would optimize. You always make sure a method works really well and gets accurate answers. And then you say, where can I save money so I can save my customers money or make more money or profit at all out of the laboratory? That's kind of how they normally work. Pretty much the method came out. It went into foot play. California had a bunch of media stories out there with all the labs were shut down because only so many people verified the method. There needed to be a method verification that each laboratory conducted, and the DCC had to go through it. That process wasn't like the hardest process. There's just a lot of back and forth, a lot of questions from the DC on verification methods, and they have a limited staff. I feel bad for a lot of their staff. I'm not going to lie. Very few people dealing with a lot of labs. I think it went from like 30 labs down to 7 labs, and then I believe it's now like 20 or so. So all the labs are done with it. They can test for flower and pre-roll now. It's verified. So the big thing is, was there going to be a change? And what we did is we worked with the group. I'm not going to name names on who it is. I'm not going to put out producers or anyone on this pod or anything. I'm trying not to do that kind of stuff. And we looked at some testing, a baseline of the previous. We've done hundreds of tests before, but a new baseline of before the new method came out. So anything tested or produced before the new year. And then we had found a big sample set. I think it was 43 samples of post-tested things tested with the new DCC method and did a comparison. I can kind of go more into it, but it was very alarming that we saw a big change in the industry in California. The first 2 weeks of the new year of 24, you just heard this huge scramble with all the THC numbers are dropping, people producing 40%, 35%. THC flower always dropped down to 20% overnight. And they were really upset. I don't know. To me, as an analytical chemist and just as a person, I don't understand this obsession with THC numbers in cannabis. It really needs to stop. And that's a lot of this reason why we do this kind of studies and research. I think if people really just knew the real number, they would stop like incentivizing all I need is THC. It's a foolish thing, and it's kind of sad. It's a sad way that cannabis is done, selling it by THC numbers. It's not the way to do it. Some of the best product on the shelf and best product that some of the growers stopped producing has lower THC numbers. And then they can't even get the labs to commit big enough fraud to get 40% or 35% or whatever it is to sell it. So they stopped growing those strains or cultivars. And now they're just in the back, not getting grown again, especially in California. So that's kind of an overview. We wrote a 3-part series with Beard Pros. Me and Eric Paulson. Eric Paulson is my lab director. He's just as passionate about this as I am, I can say. It's just overall like this whole industry is being tested and has all this stringent watchdogs and stringent testing procedures because the product contains THC. And for whatever reason, the laboratories can't even get the THC number right. That sounds like step one when you do one of these industry. The whole industry is focused just because it has THC in a plant and we can't even analyze it right. Not we, as in me. I'm saying we, as in the collective analytical labs of California.
And let me read you a quote. Here's Chef Rodney too. Rodney did the intro video and the outro video. Thanks for tuning in again, Rodney. I'd like to read this quote, if it's okay, from the Beard Brothers stories. It says, quote, therefore, there is a direct financial incentive for the labs to produce results favorable to the cultivator or manufacturer rather than representing a number accurately. This incentive is no more acute than with THC, which is often the primary price factor for dispensaries purchasing the product. So often one of two things will happen. A producer and a lab will come to an agreement about the THC number they want to label it, and they will label the product with that number, and the lab will match it with their test, or the producer goes to a lab that they know produces the highest numbers across the board and will label the product with whatever number the lab provides. Of course, as soon as these numbers become detached from reality, the numbers kept creeping up. If 20% total THC flower didn't mean as much as it used to, producers wanted higher numbers to stand out. So the desired THC number became 25%, then 30%, then 35%, with some bold labs / producers. While some bold labs / producers bumped their numbers up to the 40s, even the average THC numbers climbed north of 30, when all along everyone knew the average THC percentage in flower on the shelves is really in the low 20s. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot there, but that's kind of what we saw over the years in its perspective. And it's not like we don't just see this or hear it or make rumors. This is data driven. We always use data as analytical chemists, and we look at these results. So, I mean, I would say the history of this a long time ago. When I say a long time, it's a long time in the cannabis years. We live in the dog years. I feel like every year is like 7 or 5 years. It has to be. So like back in 2019, 2020, we really got the labs were getting pressure like, hey, I need 20% from producers. And I would say after another year or two, I think it actually switched. It wasn't necessarily the producers being like, hey, labs, give me this number. The labs were calling the producers and pitching them like, hey, are you having trouble selling your product? You want higher numbers? Try our lab. We'll do it for free. Try it. Just try it. And, the producers get a 35% and then their flower selling out quicker. And they're like, hey, I got to stick with this lab. And it became this game of labs pitching producers. And I feel bad. And it's the same thing. It's like if we want to grade cannabis as quality of THC number, you can't use a broken grading system, because then the guy actually out there really choosing his cultivars correctly, producing a high THC value strain, now has to use the same lab, because if your 20 became 30 and the guy was growing 30, now he has to use the lab to get 40s. I remember one of the last producers that we really stuck around with, or last growers, he wouldn't go test anywhere else because he was getting 50%. And he's like, I can't even, Josh, I can't write that on the can. I can't write it on the label because no one believes it. I don't even believe it. And I'm like, that's what happens. You know, he was producing mid-30s all the time, constant, because he chose the right strains, had an indoor grow operation, really trimmed it up nicely. And that's kind of what he had. But then he was getting 50% with other people. So I mean, that's kind of the history of it and where it went. And that's why we made those claims. So part one, we just gave a big overview of this. Yeah.
And here's Rodney again. I've had low THC flower hit me harder than alleged high THC flower. It's all a marketing ploy.
100%. And that's what I hate about this industry. I mean, it's jumping probably the gun to these things, but like a solution to this, if we can't control the system and the system can't get controlled, I strongly suggest that THC numbers are removed from flower. You do not put them. Don't allow anyone to put them on the products. This is a game of marketing and it's a game of cheating and fraud and collusion. You stop it by not allowing it anymore. I think that would be better. You go to the same growers, the same strains, the same people you trust. Like, hey, this is grower A, or the producer on the product. Like, I really like their product. Let me try a new strain. Oh, this is a strain I really like. Stop getting infatuated with these THC numbers.
Oh, hey, I'm kind of with you there, Josh. I'd love to see some just blind, taste tests. Like, hey, why don't you just smoke it, see if you like it? Okay, cool.
Then you find the grower and the organization that's growing it. You're like, man, I like these guys that they like that. They do what I kind of like. So then you continue on with them, and you find their different products. I think that's the way to really this industry should be.
And let me ask you, because you sort of touched on this, is that chain of custody sort of in Vermont? I know growers are all allowed to select their own samples. So in Cali, right? Do they have other people do that? How does that go?
No, so laboratories are responsible. We have to create an SOP, a standard operating procedure, that makes us take a representative sample. So what I mean by that, I have a million stories about this, like going into places and then trying to hand you a bag, be like, take this, and you're like, no, you can't do that, and get out of my facility, you can't take it. You're not going to be a testing lab. Okay, we're done. But so we do have a random sampling, and this is actually something we did. We collect these Beard Bro stories are great. I part 1, part 2, part 3. Part 1 is just kind of summary. Part 2 is a lot of tongue in cheek, and it's not meant to offend anyone. It's kind of really just showing people how could I achieve this? If I'm an honest lab, how could I achieve that 20% become 40%? There's a lot of different ways in it.
Here, I'll pull the story up real quick since you did the segue to part 2 there. This is the Beer Bros store, a how-to guide to THC potency inflation. And I'm glad you mentioned that it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, because that is definitely how I read it myself.
It was for the first part, and it's not to offend anyone. It's just like we've talked about this so many times, and it's like, how do you do it? How do you do it? And that's what we said. And like everyone always hypothesizes, like, oh, you do this, this, and that. I didn't hypothesize. I said, you know what? We're going to prep it in every such way. I'm going to prep all this stuff, these 43 samples in different manners, triple kit preps, all sorts of things to take any kind of ambiguity or prove actually analytically we are doing it correctly, and to show we have consistency. And then we did all of the steps you could do to create the inflation. So it's like a choose your own destiny. How did this 40% flour become 40% flour? I had to misstep, do this, this, and that. And you brought up a great point. So you do grab a sample and homogenize it in California, and that's California, and I work in Michigan too, and we have to do that there as well. Most states don't allow the producers to give the samples, and I would strongly advise that not to happen. If any of the regulators ever listen to this, like, that needs to stop. You need to have randomized sampling done by the laboratories. But what we did to even check on this, I do have a couple flower clients that still stick with me. Over the years, great people, really wanted to continue on, believe in doing the right thing, and didn't trace the flower numbers. So what I did after I was thinking about this while doing this study with this group, I'm like, you know what? Let me go grab a control sample. My control sample is going to test the whole theory that you hear. The theory is, oh, when I take my bud from my bulk batch and I put it into my jars or my bags and I sell it out to the stores, the THC numbers dramatically go down. I had 40% when I started, but then I got 20% somehow. So what I did is I went to one of the producers that I tested the product on in the beginning of January using the DCC's method. 3 months later, I went to 5 different store shelves, acquired 1/8 from the same batch at 5 different stores local in San Diego of the same exact flour under the same batch that I tested the bulk batch of, InfiniteCAL, not me. And then I went ahead and I took each bag of that each eighth, homogenized it as a sample, and it's all within like 6% up or down, relative 6%. So realistically, I think the flower itself said 24%, and every number became 22 to 24.5 or something like that. That was kind of the range. So what does that do? It shows you, do people actually really lose a bunch of THC when it gets packaged and sits on shelf? I mean, from my study, it would say no. It would highly suggest no is the answer to that. There's a lot of data to this study. I did my best to present it. And as a chemist, we're trying to give this to the public. So a lot of this stuff we kind of don't put 100% put into these stories because it's a lot. That data was thousands of data points. This is not a small amount of work. We do this stuff because we're passionate about it and we like to learn it. I mean, if I didn't run the company, probably there's no one out there that will allow this kind of stuff happening.
Well, and I do want to ask you if it's feasible for the state to collect samples in California in a state that size. But hang on, let me read this comment. Somewhat Cyclops agreed. I don't believe that THC percentage should be reported on labels. It gives consumers a false sense of what the product is. Quote, low, medium, high is fine if necessary. Terpenes, etc., are more important. And there's Rodney saying, let's replace the THC with terpene profiles.
So the scary part of the terpene profile, that kind of happened in Oregon. I mean, if you guys look back at Oregon's history, terpene profile became a big point. And for whatever reason, the terpene profiles went from 2% to 11% over the 12-month period. So all they do is start inflating terpenes.
Huh. Interesting.
But that's just I agree. I wish there was a low, medium, high, but I feel like if we did low, medium, high, everything would just be high. Unless there's extreme checks and balances. That's the answer to this. It's never a method or anything. It's a checks and balance system. And what I mean by that is things have to be checked. Things on the shelf produced. It's not the producers necessarily. It's the labs. It's sad that this come to this, but when we allow a laboratory industry that's supposed to be really based on public safety and ethics, kind of fall off and go into this realm it's become, it's kind of business appeasing customers and things like that. And that's not the way to run a laboratory.
Well, and there's somewhat Cyclops again. Yeah, I've heard that report from Oregon, terpene inflation. I do want to circle back to the first Beard Brothers story, though, because I had a question, and you just reminded me of that. Is you said that every one of these tests has its own like matrix, like potency and pesticides and heavy metals. So, like, I assume terpenes probably would fall into that as well. And, especially if you have farmers cherry picking their own samples, it seems like, because most of the farmers I know, they want to pick their best shit. They want to put that in the jar. It's going to test at 30. But then if you pick some of the lowers and you put them in a jar, then it might, if someone went and shelf tested that, maybe that comes out at 15. And then maybe they say, hey, the lab is inflating the potency, when maybe that was just a case of cherry picking. I assume there's a little bit of both going on there, but I'm curious if you had any thoughts on that.
So with what you're saying, the case in point, like a state allows the cherry picking, 100% that could be happening. In a state like California, where the study was written, there's no cherry picking. You're looking at averages, because the laboratory goes and takes the batch, and you don't take every best bud. You're randomly selecting buds, breaking the buds in half or pieces of buds out, and taking a lot of different samples from all over the batch. So you're getting an average. And then that's what I did with that one flower sample. It shows, hey, the average of the batch equal the average of each bag. Because when they go ahead, unless they're selling very small bags, if you get like gram bags, you can have bigger fluctuations. But if you're packaging things in eighths, quarters, things like that, you look at the average of the eighth or the quarter, it should be right in line with that batch. Does that make sense?
Sure does. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And here's Kirk Berry. Good point, Josh. I don't know what you're talking about, Kirk, but hey, thanks for tuning in. I've talked with Kirk a few times, man. Appreciate you watching. And, I've talked to a number of scientists about different ways that you could sort of fudge these tests. And, I think some of them were mentioned in this story about, where is it? There we go.
So I can go over if you want me to.
Yeah, it's increasing the sample mass, diluting the sample solution less, modifying the calibration curve. Would you mind touching on some of those things, John?
So that's what we did, is we took some common threads. So the funny part is, in this industry, is there's a lot of people that talk. For some reason, labs talk to other labs. The ex-employees for whatever, reach out to me of laboratories. And I'm not going to go out and point out names of laboratories, but if you have ex-employees, they for some reason reach out to Josh, all you cheating labs. I'll tell you that. And they tell me exactly how they did it. So some of these things that we did in this article is just information provided to me by ex-employees or by current laboratories in the state of California. So one thing we did in the new method, you use 0.2 grams. So what we did is we used 0.2 grams and then to do our standard prep to get the baseline. And then we did something where we prep 0.24 grams. So every time there'd be a 0.24, I would just change it to 0.20, like as if I instructed my laboratory technician to do that. But I just recorded all the masses. That's one way of doing it. You could use 0.3 instead of 0.2. You can mess up your dilution. The way I messed up the dilution, I just did it by a standard. I said use 30 mils total instead of 40. That's a very common thing. You could do that systematically by doing multiple dilutions and doing 5 each time or 10 each time. So we did that. And then we did a combination of things where I prepped 0.24 and did a dilution factor. I prepped standards by using a 5% error on the InfiniteCAL ret curve. It kind of compounds over each time you do your secondary secondary dilutions. And I did a 10% error on my pipette. But I don't use pipettes. I use gravimetric. So it's the real way to do it if you're trying to be accurate. So there's a million ways to skin a cat. What we kind of did, and this is the whole purpose of it, is here's a bunch of ways I could do it. Let's see, when did it actually match the DCC's method? Oh, look, sample A, they did a 0.24 and a 30 mil dilution using a 5-point calibration curve. And look, it's in 1% relative difference between the two now. So you can actually look at the data and see exactly what they chose to do. That's what I thought was the most interesting thing about it.
Huh. Okay. That's why I get you on the show, Josh. Hell yeah. I do want to, and some of this stuff is over my head, guys. For any of my horde of fans watching, this is why I talk to people who know more than me, because they're much better with data. I do want to pull up this other story that I think is behind a paywall, but I saw on LinkedIn the other day, and this was the other big one here. It's from the Detroit Free Press. Michigan Cannabis Lab CEO says hidden substances, I think, are found in vape carts. I don't know what the rest of that headline says, but I was wondering if you'd give us a briefing on that story as well, Josh.
So as an honest operator and someone that cares about public safety, and that's my whole goal, I have many battles in many of states. I mean, I don't take them as personal battles. I just try to make sure that we're not going to kill this industry. I'm just going to preface this whole thing with that is like, we go down this road of legalizing cannabis. This is what we all wanted. And then we want to go ahead and save 10 cents a vape cart. And then we end up in 5-10 years, people end up getting cancer or significant lung problems. And one day we go back to look at these results by all the medical diagnosis, and we say, guess what? Cannabis causes cancer. And I really have a strong feeling it's not going to be cannabis causes cancer. It's these other things causing cancer. But guess who's going to blame for it? If anyone thinks industry has become big enough to they withstand any of this stuff, so I want you to go ask the cigarette industry how that's going for them. It's not going well if you look back to what they were used to do compared to now. I'll kind of go into this study was conducted with a group, an organization out there in Michigan. There was 200 samples that were purchased and given to my laboratory. The laboratory, they're checked in, made sure they're all sealed, and the packages were never disturbed or anything else. There in this study, there's 57 brands represented, I believe. You can check 57 different brands that were represented. And what we've done out there is we started looking at THC. We were looking at THC numbers on some of these and a long time ago and said, why are THC numbers in Michigan seem to be dropping? And then what's in there to make it up? So a lot of things, what we're seeing is we started seeing pollutants. So one pollutant we saw was something called MCT oil. MCT oil is the same thing you use in your cooking oil. Should you be inhaling that? No. There's a lot of studies out there that say you should not be vaporizing MCT oil or smoking MCT oil. I've
seen it used in tinctures a lot, however.
But you can eat it. So there's a big difference. The way you consume something is a big problem, right? So you can eat different things. Should you smoke everything? The answer is no, right? Your lungs can't digest the oil like your stomach would. Right. So that's kind of where you get a problem. See, that's not normally, you don't have a chronic or acute health problems. So like vitamin E acetate, it created acute health problems. I personally feel, and I'm not a medical doctor, and just from the studies I've read, MCT oil will give you a chronic health problem. Meaning after time, you're going to start to see these issues arise. And that's when you go back and say, well, sir, what have you been doing to get this chronic lung problem? Well, I've been smoking vaporizer vape pens made in cannabis. Well, guess what? Cannabis vaporizers are giving everyone this chronic lung problem. No, it was the MCT oil. And this is the thing. Why are people doing it? Either they're unbeknownstly doing this because they're buying terpenes for cheaper or some additive, or they're doing it intentionally and mixing in an additional compound. One, you can make it thinner, or you can just make 10% more. So it's just like stomping on any other drug or making it more product from anything else. So if I get 10% more, now I just got a 10% more profit margin. Great for me. The thing is, when I was doing this, I validated that MC2L method. The state of Michigan, I did a full validation and did it on all vaporizer type products or concentrates that you would inhale. And I conducted that full validation. I submitted it to the state of Michigan, and the state of Michigan approved the validation was valid. Why that's monumental, in my opinion, that is not illegal, something in the state law. It doesn't say you have to do that. And I think that's what the states need. This is not a game of how we cheat the system. We got to make sure it's going correctly. And I all the states out there, that's what they should be looking for, is additional compounds. So why? Because this industry changes. I'll say MC2L I got done, and then what we were going to continue on that route, because I found a lot more dangerous compounds that are being used as dilutants, and I just haven't had the time and money to do it. And I'm sorry that I really wish I did, but everything does cost money. This is one of those things that who should be doing this? Universities, schools, states. This should be government funded, not Josh Swider funded because he cares too much. And that's the truth.
Have I been saying your name wrong the whole time?
Swider, yeah. That's fine. Everyone's wrong. I probably never corrected you. But so we looked at MCTO. After MCTO, we looked at another thing that we've been looking at for about 2.5 years. There's a new item in the cannabis industry, and like I'm not going to steal someone else's term, but I heard the word canna fraud. It's kind of a good term. I kind of like it. So you have different Delta-9 THC is normally the thing you look at in a concentrate. Delta-9 THC is produced on a marijuana plant, it is produced on a hemp plant, and it's also synthetically produced. Those are the three options, or they could be bio-produced, but I would kind of consider that synthetic, like yeast. You can use yeast to make THC. Those 4 different options are kind of the way of how it was produced. My laboratory now has a validated method that determines if it is produced on a cannabis plant, if it is produced on Delta-9 from a cannabis or marijuana plant, if it's produced on a hemp plant, or if it's synthetically produced. When you produce the Delta-9 THC synthetically, you get a couple different things. One, you're going to get enantiomers and isostereomers. So normally on a cannabis plant, from thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of samples that I've looked at, and also looking into literature, Delta-9 THC, or what we call THC, on a marijuana plant is negative trans Delta-9 is what it goes to. There's a cis Delta-9, a positive negative, and a negative, I believe. And then there's also the positive negative trans Delta-9, which is not very common. But those are the different enantiomers and isostereomers of Delta-9. So when we say THC, we're really talking about 4 compounds, everyone. Delta-9 THC is 4 different distinct compounds. In the past, there's a lot of things out there that if we don't check for these enantiomers and stereoisomers of a compound, just because it has the same mass and same chemical formula, they still can be extremely dangerous. A birth control in Europe was produced a long time ago. It's not that long ago, the 80s, and America declined to use it, and they never checked for the stereochemistry of these compounds. And then 50,000 or 100,000 people got their birth defects, severe birth defects from it. That was just a simple thing that we just talked about. So if you start to make things differently, when you do it synthetically, you normally check these things. Also, during the process of synthetic chemistry, synthetically making Delta-9, you create byproducts.
Oh, what?
Byproducts, yeah.
Was that the phthalate babies?
Yep, 100%. That's all that is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Phthalate. Yeah.
Just wanted to check. Yep.
Yep. I mean, I'm not saying this is 100% going to happen with this, but These are those things you want to check when you do synthetic chemistry. The other thing you create are byproducts that are never found on cannabis plants, and you also create byproducts that are found on cannabis plants or marijuana plants. There are a few compounds that are routinely made during the synthetic process, which are a good key giveaway to if you have synthetic cannabis or synthetic delta-9 THC. You can go down this road and talk about what synthetic cannabinoids we are. You can have CBN, THCV, things of these, and you can determine if they're synthetic or not. The validation that I'm speaking about is just looking at delta-9 for now. Again, when Josh Swider funds everything, it takes longer than I wish. Maybe I'm faster than the states though, or government still. But we have a method that'll put them in a different bucket. So that was a long prelude to this study. But the 200 samples that we conducted analysis on checked for 3 different categories. One, the state of Michigan's pesticide contaminant list. The second thing that was looked for in all of the 200 vape pens or the concentrate pens was MCT oil. And the third was conversion, delta-9 conversion. CBD, it's normally CBD to delta-9 conversion. It's the most affordable way to do it. Why do people do it? You can buy conversion for $300 to $500 a liter. In Michigan, I think today it's about $2,500 to $3,500 a liter. So people are just doing that. People are the same thing. They buy a liter of this and mix it with a liter of that of cannabis derived, and then just kind of stomping it down, cutting it, making more of a profit margin. One, it's not allowed in any of the states because you would have to be importing a non-cannabis good. I'm telling you right now, there is no state that you're going to hear arguments and opposition to this. But sitting and talking to state regulators, there's no legal pathway to do it. There might be some kind of loophole if you had approval or this or that, but no one has approval. So I'd love to really hear other opposition on that. If anyone wants to chat, you're more than welcome to give me a call on this, and I'll talk with anyone about this kind of subject.
I would also like to hear that if anyone would like to have that conversation. This is a little over my head, but I'm definitely fascinated by this. And it seemed like that was always going to happen. Like in Vermont, they put THC caps on vape cartridges in the first year. So like people were like, how are we going to have to water this down? And, I talked to Jeff Rawson, who said he almost died from E-Valley from smoking like black market vape cartridges. And this is definitely a hot topic here, Josh.
So the study that we continued on with the 200 samples, we found that MCT oil, the samples that contained MCT oil, there was 43 samples of the 200, meaning 22% of those samples contained MCT oil. There was 35 samples that contained conversion, CBD delta-9 conversion. I think the total fail, and then I think there was 4 samples that contained pesticides over the allowable limit in the state of Michigan. So overall, if you look at all of them, I think it was a 36% fail rate, if I remember correctly, overall. So out of 200 vape carts, 57 different brands, you had 36% failure rate when just looking at those 3 categories. It's a little alarming to see that kind of thing. Sure, what's the allowable limit of MCT oil? If someone wants to say that or argue that, the answer is 0. Why? Because not one of the packages listed MCT oil as an additive. According to the state of Michigan, this is a Michigan study, that anything you add outside of a cannabis plant would need to be stated. None of these stated they had MCT oil, so all of them would be actually non-compliant. The state of Michigan does not allow conversion into the system, so each one of those would be also failed. The pesticides, I don't need to argue that you have action levels, and they're well above the action levels of those pesticides that we found. That was overall the basis of this study. Why we went to the Detroit Free Press on that, and we keep doing a lot of these studies, and I feel like, who am I doing it for? It's not to attack any producer or any lab or anything like that. I work for the public. I work for the public safety. I might not be paid by the public, but that's what we are. We're a public safety testing laboratory. So I know I have people that pay me are the producers of these products, but at the same time, I'm not saying it's impossible any of these people to use my lab, but normally the good actors in the industry use the good labs in the industry because they truly care about the clientele. So what I'm saying, why I'm saying bringing this all up, it's something that needs to get done and something that should be looked at. If anything, the consumer should have a choice, right? If you're walking into a store that says cannabis store, it shouldn't be synthetically created store. And I'm going to go one more tangent on this, synthetically created stuff. This is the same type of thing that if we said, can I say that? I'll say Pfizer. Pfizer, you no longer have to do safety or efficacy studies. You just go ahead and produce. You find a natural compound. You go ahead back to your laboratory, produce the natural compound. Don't look at the purity of it. Don't look at the safety of the byproducts. Don't look at the safety of the enantiomers. And then go ahead and have the public smoke it. Do you think that's going to be allowed? Anyone out there? There is no way that is allowed. That's because we have safety protocols because we don't allow this kind of stuff. That's what I say. Hey, anyone that's truly producing CBD Delta 9, go ahead and do the right thing. If you really want to go down that alley and get it into the legal market and the legal system, do your safety and efficacy studies of your byproducts and your compounds alone. And I know the counter argument will be cannabis did not do this. But at the same time, when you naturally extract a product, we normally have a lot longer history of that natural product being consumed. And then that was what was allowed. Just because they allowed the natural product to be adopted into a legal market system doesn't mean you can ignore the problems with synthetic conversion and then just say it's like it, so it doesn't matter. You'll hear people out there saying there's no difference between THC. I'm sorry, if you say that, you're not a chemist. Any chemist that would ever say that, and if you are a chemist, you should go revisit some basic chemistry, because there are 4 types of Delta 9 THC, and anyone would know that. So I really applaud people to look into this kind of stuff. And I know it can go above a lot of people's head, but that's why we went to someone like Detroit Free Press. I really enjoyed that article. I think she did a great job writing it. And we brought it down to the level of the people that are buying the cannabis, not having advanced degrees, and bringing up the point. The big tickets on that story, it's not always true, but a lot of times when you see a deal to be too good to be true, guess what? It's too good to be true. Well, if you're buying a vape pen for $5 and the cost of distillate is $4 a gram, how are you going to a store and buying it for cheaper than someone can produce it?
Well, and you mentioned that last time we talked, Josh, about the lab testing. When people are offering you super cheap lab testing, maybe there's some corners being cut,
Yeah. I mean, just like everyone else, there's prices for services and product. And if something's too good to be true, maybe it's too good to be true. I'm not going to go out there and name every brand and say, hey, this brand had this or this brand had that. Because one, it's not my study all the way. I don't own the rights to the data all the way, because someone did do this study and I did it for them. And secondly, I'll guarantee I'll be sued. And I mean, I'm out here trying to protect the public. I'm going to get sued by brands for putting their name out there. The sad part is I have a strong feeling a lot of these brands know exactly what they're doing.
Okay. I want to ask you about this in here. I was supposed to do this like 10 minutes ago, but I got lost. It's Josh Swider, and I'm going to start saying your name right from now on. Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs. I wish you would have corrected me a long time ago. Yep. Thanks, Josh. So the other one I got up here is some of this data from Michigan. And, this is from Jamie Toth. Oh, is it going to refresh? So I had Jamie on the show, I don't know, a few weeks ago, somewhere in there. And this is randomized data. But from what she was telling me, it seems like there's 1 or 2 labs in Michigan where a lot of inflated potency numbers are coming from, if I understand right. And if you're watching, Jamie, hey, maybe you could chime in here. But yeah, any thoughts on that stuff, Josh?
Yeah, I think I read this article. It came out a little bit ago, and it kind of seems like it got refreshed out there, and like kind of picked up media attention again. Yeah, I mean, the state of Michigan has similar problems to the first part of the conversation we had about the Beard Pros articles and the THC inflation in California. It's not as severe yet, but you do start to see these things between laboratories willing to inflate numbers. In the state of Michigan, they have a kind of a check policy after a certain number, and I think people get caught up on that. It means it's real or not. I think that this looks kind of very interesting. You see,
sorry, there we go. She said Click on the high THC strains tab, and there it is. Lab 1s and lab 14 seem to have the majority of the
Yeah,
inflated numbers. So
I saw this data. It seems like one or two laboratories out there are producing very high numbers, and if you look at that data too, it almost seemed like there was not as much of an array of data. It seemed like it pushed towards one side. I've seen Jamie's data. I've seen Yasha's data. I know you've talked to him too, and he great illustrations between both of them, showing that you pretty much can shift these things, and that's what happens, and that's what starts these races in each of these states or anywhere. It seems like
see,
it
you
seems
see
like
that
it just,
comment?
yeah. Lab 14 was a bunch of API errors, as I recall.
Does that mean anything to you? I don't know what API errors are.
It was imported, I believe. She's importing it through an API.
Oh,
So I mean,
okay.
I know I've looked at that data, the raw data set that Jamie has, but I've seen the raw data set a long time ago. And you can filter out a lot of the errors of that because there was things peppered in that raw data set, like vaporizers and things like that. And you could remove it by just looking at a name of a sample. But if you scrub that data out to clean it first and then looked at it, you still have the same types of things going on. Like I'm saying, that to me, it's a telltale sign. Sure, could one producer be working with like an indoor cultivar that's only growing higher THC strains, or indoor cultivators selecting cultivars? Excuse me, that's probably a more appropriate way to say it. Sure, but you would normally see it wash out in averages. To say like the indoor high strain cultivars are only working with 1 or 2 or 3 labs sounds very odd. And why is it selectively doing that? In the state of Michigan, I'll tell you this: the potency inflation is out there. In my opinion, that's just my opinion. I'm not pointing fingers at any 1, 2, 3 labs. There's a lot of people out there that probably would point fingers at certain people, but I think it's a systemic problem, and I think this problem of appeasing a client or doing things maybe incorrectly or trying to make the numbers higher in the laboratory shouldn't be the concern of a laboratory to do it. It really should be monitored, and in all reality, all the analytical methods will give you the same result if you're doing right. You don't need a standardized method to do this. Even in Michigan, you hear all these controversies. Like one method will give you higher. If something's giving you a lot higher results, there's something systemically wrong biasing your data. This stuff, it's not that hard to do, and it's just like I feel like it's excuses. But that's just a general point. What I see in that data is it should be looked at. So what needs to happen is, I know the state of Michigan, this is what we're talking about right here with this data set, has a laboratory that's going to be opening up. I really hope they're just screening this stuff. I think it's January. They just stated out they're going to open up. Hope that's one of the first methods they do, because I truly feel this is going to sound cliche or stupid. And just was teaching, and people said this a long time ago. Not my opinion, but potency inflation is the gateway drug of testing fraud. It's like you start doing potency inflation, then look, safety testing. I got to pass this and do that. And like that's why I say, if you're willing to cheat or falsify data for one thing, how much easier is it going to be to just do the next one? So that's why like InfiniteCAL and the labs I run, I would never do any cheat at all. There's a cut and dry line. All safety testing facilities should have that cut line. Not, hey, I'm going to do a little bit of this because I need to make money, or I'm going to do a little bit of that. And then it just kind of slides off and it becomes this gateway drug of the lab fraud industry.
Oh, and that, boy, there is some weird feedback there. I do want to read this other comment. Here we go. And high THC strains, no outliers, removes the API errors from the graph of high THC strains / labs. These states can perform these kind of this kind of data and analysis. The tool I use to create those graphs is free. Yeah, great.
That's what I wish states would really do. Is like what Jamie, it looks like Jamie's saying here is that they should be hiring a third-party independent consultants to look at their data, and they can anonymize it or not anonymize it, and they have a confidentiality agreement that they only get the data back, and maybe it's not published, but I mean, it seems like that's what you'd want to do. All the the industries, you should be using the tools that you have. If someone can let's look at statistical anomalies and say there's something that could be wrong. For like Jamie's study here, I'm going to usurp. She's just talking here. Jamie's not the judge, jury, and executioner, but maybe she points them in the right direction. Then they can go look at something. Oh, wait, we tested the samples and they all came out wrong. Well, something might be wrong. Okay, let's go talk to the lab and have them fix the problem. Or if it's a systemic problem, then maybe the lab gets in trouble. But I think fixing these things is the way forward. I mean, in Michigan, I'll say this: it is sliding off again. You're seeing it, and it's kind of sad where either guaranteed results are being offered and things like that, like California. I always say, like, California, I feel like the ghost of Christmas past. It should be like everyone should use it like that. You watch what happened in California, it's going to happen in your state unless you kind of control for these problems. The lab fraud really fell off hard in California, and I'll make that statement. And the other states, it either caught up or surpasses them. But I think there's a collective issue here. And I'll say this, the collective issue is going back to the labs. I am a lab operator. I love analytical chemistry. This is what I devoted my life to. And sometimes it's embarrassing to say I'm a part of the cannabis analytical community because it's such a bad stereotype right now because most of them are doing a lot of things very, very wrong. You're going to see hopefully a correction. This is what happens in a lot of industries. This isn't only cannabis. Cannabis, I know we're special. Everything, we're number one. We're the newest and greatest everything. Lab fraud is nothing new, guys. When labs get oversaturated in markets because there was money to be made, normally the lab fraud starts. You look at environmental testing in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Look at the state of California's water board. They had major testing fraud problems. That's a major government agency. And guess what? They admitted it and they cleaned it up. And sadly, lab operators went to jail. They got felonies. I mean, public safety is not something to mess with. I know people could look back at this like people shouldn't go to jail, but if people are putting people in danger to create a dollar at a laboratory, or they might excuse it by ignorance. I'm sorry, maybe that's the wrong term, but I didn't know I didn't know I was testing this incorrectly. Well, why do you own a laboratory? Why you're in the wrong profession? Last time I checked, I can't go. If a surgeon be like, I don't know how to do surgery, he died. It's fine. Yeah. He's not going to be allowed to be a surgeon, right? Why is analytical labs even allowed to be a profit center? It's not, guys. This is public safety. You should really take this seriously. Any producer out there, you should really look at the credibility of the laboratories you guys work with. I'm not saying just work with me. I'm saying there's good people out there. Just make sure that you're choosing the right ones. I think this goes back to this will end up going back, and who's going to be punished. It's like you kind of brought something up before. In the state of California, are they checking things? Seems like the state of California has 1-2 recalls a week. Recently, we've been seeing THC recalls, or they're included on the aspergillus and THC inflation being listed as the recall issues. So who's really paying? It's the producer now. Now, if the producer intentionally or unintentionally worked with a laboratory, I found it very sad. And I even made a post, and people might not like it on LinkedIn. One of the recalls, I found the COA that caused the recall, and I put it out there. I don't know why every time we focus so solely on the producer and be like, look what the producer did. He's bad. He gets a recall. Give him a bad mark against his name. Well, what about the testing lab that approved it? What about the testing lab that did that original THC number or the safety testing that might not be safe? I'm not saying anyone's guilty of any of these things, but for some reason, though, the producers are getting put on blast with the labs sitting in the background like, oh, well, I mean, I think this should be something that should be done. All the COAs should be produced when a recall happens. Everyone should be able to see the lab, not to embarrass them. So the lab can defend themselves if they need to, or show the data if they have defensible data, or if they made a mistake, they can admit they made a mistake and move forward and fix their problems.
Hey, imagine that, admitting that maybe we didn't do something right and just doing it again.
Yeah,
it's crazy. I do want to ask you too, and I want to read these couple comments. I got a couple more questions for you, Josh, but this is from Jamie too here. Absolutely agree. If they will cheat for THC, they will cheat for anything that impacts economic viability of their clients' products.
So I'll comment on that. I knew some people that, they moved to a THC inflation lab, and they had pesticide problems, but they worked with the THC inflation lab for a couple of years, and then they couldn't work with them anymore because maybe they stopped working. This isn't Michigan. I'm not going to say what state this is. I'm not pointing at any lab. And then they found out that actually one of the products they were using contained a pesticide in it, and they were failing all their samples for pesticide. But guess what? It was never out there that it not one of their tests ever showed it, because the lab that was producing the inflation number was just showing them a falsified negative or a negative mark.
Well, if you could inflate a number, I assume you could deflate a number as well.
Yeah. So like these producers might be working with these labs and they never know they had a pesticide problem. They never know they had an aspergillus problem because the lab was never reporting it, and that's who's supposed to report it to them. So that's why I strongly say, like, if you're getting results any way you're doing it too good to be true in one analysis, how far off is the other ones? And then how far are you willing to put the public safety in jeopardy, or get recalls, or get negative repercussions for using these labs?
And here, let me just fucking slap this up one more time. Josh Swider, I'm saying his name right now. Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs, and I have a acquaintance here in Vermont who is curious about your thoughts on aspergillus testing. And I saw what happened in Oregon, and I don't know if you want to give like a little briefing on that, but it looked like they had like non-detect testing, and then everyone was failing. So maybe someone sued the state. They got that out of the way. But also, there's been a lot of talk about this here in Vermont, and Shane told me to ask you. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on aspergillus testing.
I mean, aspergillus testing can be really tough. I mean, as in there's a lot of this stuff out there that we're putting public safety testing requirements on cannabis. And I don't know how many studies are out there. And I'm not saying it is safe, but I think the testing can be flawed. And why I'm saying this is I don't think the testing protocol, the test batches of cannabis, should be a producer sends it in, or you sample a batch of cannabis and then you test a small amount of that kind of too small of an amount to actually give a representative batch. So like most states are using 1 gram or 0.5 gram. I say if you really want detect, non-detect on aspergillus, you shouldn't be doing that. You should design the test. Maybe you're using 25 grams and extracting from there. You're going to see a lot more fails potentially, but it would strengthen the thing of actually being detect, not detect. This goes back to a very similar problem of pesticides in California. I'm going to put it back to, there's something called category 1 pesticides. And what that is non-detect is the action level. Meaning that if you ever see anything, you're supposed to fail it if you can confirm it. So what this did is the labs out there started raising their LOQs, a limit of quantification, and LODs. And I remember you used to see it would tack it at 0.1 because that's the required LOQ by the state. So then, like, if you have a lab out there that's seeing it at 0.1, right, and then another lab seeing it at 0.01, now you're 10 times different. So one lab will fail it 10 times more often, or at a lower concentration than the other one. I think with aspergillus testing, I think there is some strides that should be made going forward to fixing it if we want to use it. I think this should be determined if we want to use it or not. And if it is, at least just make sure it's being done correctly between all the facilities. I'm not going to comment on is it safe or not. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't know enough of the studies. I've read some of them.
That's exactly what I told Shane. I said, I'm going to ask him, but I bet he'll say, I'm not a medical doctor and I'm not going to. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, like, I've seen studies out there. I was looking for deaths on aspergillus, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I donate a lot of my time to a lot of things, and I try to read as many studies as I can. There's only one study that found one aspergillus cause of a death, and that was from a dying person that had cancer. So I think that could be right. Maybe it's not. I go back to, like, in Oregon, it seems like what happened is in Oregon, there's no testing protocol for it. Oregon operated for, I want to say, like 13 years, really, before this. They made a testing protocol. If I remember right from an article, it said 70% of the samples were failing. And then it went backwards, failing for detect, non-detect. So how many health problems have we seen in Oregon? A lot or little? I don't know. I don't want to say it's bad or good. I don't necessarily think it's going to be good, but it might not be as detrimental as people think. And I would love to see cases, but could it be a contamination issue? And this is kind of what he goes back to, I believe, what he's asking. Should it be detect, not detect, or should we be talking about colony forming units per gram? Maybe that's kind of the way forward with it. Because if it's very small amounts, then Is it harmful? Possibly, or is it possibly not? But if we want to do detect, non-detect, I would strongly advise regulators and anyone else, make it a fair playing field. Use larger sample sizes, extract more, and then look to see if we see it or not. Aspergillus or any of these microbial contaminations don't grow linearly. They grow as in like they're gonna not infest linearly. You could have segments of the product that have it. So it's actually a hard thing to look at. So like this is a thing like I would equate it to like mycotoxin testing in nuts. All exported like peanuts, almonds, things like that, they test for mycotoxins. I'm going to say exported. You didn't hear in the U.S. For some reason that safety protocol is not as wide. It's not stringent. It's exporting to the EU and things like that. It's a big field. But when you do this type of testing, you're taking very large sample sizes, homogenizing them together, and taking very large samples to perform you do an extraction on. It's not these teeny little, I take one peanut from 10,000 pounds of peanut and test that single peanut, because everything would pass. And that's why I go back to that thing. If we want to do this and have the testing, that needs to be done right. But I think I'll let the other people argue if it's safe or not.
Okay. Hey, let me slap a couple of comments. This is from Luke Williams, Omerta Genetics. Farmers should never collect their own samples. Hey, Luke, thanks for tuning in. And I'm going to blast
on that too, Luke. What I've been hearing too from a lot of states with the collect your own samples, even in the states without your collect your own sample, the producers will hand stuff and they're just sprinkling on THCA, or they're choosing their own product, or be like, hey, I microwaved this. Test this for all the microbials you want.
Yeah. Hold that thought for a minute. We're going to talk about microwaving in a minute. This is also for Jamie. I wrote a lot about it. I think she's talking about aspergillosis, maybe, or something. Many deaths identified. They tend to be of immunocompromised patients, those on chemo, etc. The ones who helped usher in the medical market. It's not the same risk level for adult use, and I am also not a doctor. Just some blogger. You're not just some blogger, Jamie. Give yourself some credit.
But I mean, I think that's a good point, though, too. It's like that's why we should have a medical market with a higher standard than the adult use potentially. Things like exactly the point. If we want to argue with aspergillosis is safe or not, why can't we have a medical market? Or the medical market could be also people that just want a safer, non-contaminated product. It's the same thing as like organic food. People think that it's less pesticides or less of this or less that. That's not always the case. It's just more money. But at the same time, you're giving people the option. I think the medical market kind of died in most states, and it's kind of sad. But I think maybe that's how we differentiate the medical market from an adult use market, is you almost do more stringent data or allowable limits, or more stringent or additional compounds that you're looking for. I think that's a good kind of thought.
Yeah, and it seemed like in some ways the medical market was actually getting more leeway than the adult use market, which I thought to me seemed bass backwards.
It's always interesting.
So maybe, and you touch on this real quick there, maybe we could talk about remediation for a second. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, maybe, I don't know if you've looked at this stuff, ozone remediation, X-ray remediation. They're doing RF remediation. Any thoughts on that, Josh?
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that are remediated. And again, a lot of things in the world that get remediated to remove microbial contamination. Cannabis in a lot of places is being remediated. And the word remediated to me is another thing that it's only going to be used if it was seen to fail. So if I like the term, I don't know where I got this from, premediated. So if you ran it before you knew it failed, and then just run all your flour through this remediation device, you would never have to call it remediated. It's just another SOP step. So I think a lot of people actually do get remediated product that don't even know they're getting remediated product. I mean, I think a good point on this would be labeling a product. If you're using this kind of thing, you can do it. I think too, the effectiveness of these things is important. It goes back to the same thing as, I'm not going to point at any one person or any producer of these remediation products and like one works, one doesn't. I don't have enough studies out there. I'm a man of data. If I didn't collect the data myself, I don't normally promote it, because there's a million ways to collect data and falsify it. So I'm not going to go into that. I would gladly do some of these runs, but sometimes what I bring this back to is if the remediation process works for, you kill your contamination of your microbial contamination to a lower number or lower passable number, and then it goes ahead and sits on a shelf for 2 months before it's sold, does it just go straight back up? So that's always the thing with microbial contamination and any of this stuff. I think it's utterly insane just because the way microbial contamination works is we look at these data points when something was first produced, right? And we say, oh, it's safe because it made it, and they took it down, they remediated it or not remediated it, and then they tested it. And then I'm buying the product 6 months later, right? Is it the same number? I would strongly suggest not. And then you talk about microbial contamination. I mean, I've seen a lot of data out there, and there's going to be a lot more and more data with asymptotes sitting at 1,000 colony forming units and 10,000 colony forming units, showing statistical anomalies that labs seem to keep the numbers exactly where they need to be, or the producers do. I don't know.
Yeah, and that was kind of, I've also heard some interesting studies about like cannabis beverages when they sit in these cans for so long, it maybe like degrades some of the cannabinoids inside of the beverages.
So honestly, cannabis beverages have made a big comeback because I think there's been some great advancements in people making the cannabis beverages. What was it, 2016, 2017, cannabis in California, people started making cannabis beverages, and it was like these water soluble. Everyone said there's not that many great emulsion manufacturers out there. There has been a couple that came around that are doing a good job, and you used to see these beverages crash out in like a matter of days, as in the THC number would crash out of the beverage. And I remember I've been on thousands of phone calls getting yelled at by members. You don't know what you're talking about. I put this in this and it has to be in there. You don't know. And then we're like, hey, it's all stuck to the can liner. I can tell you this because we can rinse your cans out with methanol or ethanol, and then we can back calculate how many milligrams we took out of the can. And then he's like, well, then why don't you just do that as your SOP? I said, how many of your customers are rinsing out their cans with methanol and then drinking it? Because I'd be more concerned that they can see anything. But then that's like, I remember someone arguing because they produced in Washington too. And that's the SOP in Washington in their lab they were using did it. And so like over the years, we've seen it get better, but that's kind of why I felt there was a death of the cannabis beverage, is because it was not using quality analysis or chemical analysis or making sure you had shelf life. And then the market went out there with beverages and they sucked, meaning like they would get, 0.1 milligrams of THC. And after it was set on a shelf for a while and it's supposed to be a 10, and people drank it and they're like, oh, these suck. And the market died because there was a bunch of bad quality product. I'm not saying that today. Is there bad quality product out there? I'm sure there is. Is there good quality product out there? I'm sure there is too. So, I'm not promoting for the state of Michigan or anything like that. Michigan's protocol for shelf life study on beverages is way past any other state or most beverages, I feel like. There's a lot of quality testing that goes into it, and shelf life before a product can even make it on the shelf. So that's good for them that they're stepping forward on that. But I have still to this day had those same arguments with THC getting stuck in liner, crashing out. The thing is about emulsions or any of these types of beverages, normally, there's smarter people than me on emulsion chemistry. But normally you can't say I made an emulsion and it works in everything. It doesn't work like that. It's going to work in specific things. And it's not going to work in other ones. You got to make sure you're using it correctly. You can't just put it in whatever you want, any type of beverage with any types of acids or other compounds, and not expecting any kind of degradation or conversion.
So different types of additives will affect how that emulsion operates when you put it in a can or something.
Yep, 100%. I've seen this and worked with different manufacturers. If they have highly citrus, like high acidic or citrus compounds, it always seems like they get stability problems only on those ones, and then they correct for it or figure it out what to do, and then they've advanced far. A lot of these people that are doing it have put a lot of work into it. So again, I'm not saying all beverages are bad in any such way. There are great beverages out there. There are, as in great, going to give you what you're buying, and there are very poor ones. So it's the same as any other type of product in any industry. You can have very good product and very bad product, and then differentiating and finding the brands that are creating good products is an important thing to do as a customer.
And Josh, the last thing I want to ask you about is kind of a little I don't know, a curveball, but I asked you about this before. It was about the PFAS testing because, one of my other interest is environmental concerns, and we're seeing a lot of contaminated sites here in Vermont. And I'm suddenly I started thinking, hey, what if like weed plants started picking up these chemicals or uptaking them? But you also said, I think that you have the capability to test for those kind of things at your labs. And I just, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I know that's a little bit off the beaten
Yeah.
path here, but
PFAS testing is kind of it's getting a big media and kind of a big push, I would say, out there. I mean, you're starting to see a lot of states. I mean, California just released 6 compounds with allowable action levels in drinking water. And what does that mean? They're seeing PFAS in drinking water. If you're seeing PFAS in drinking water, guess where else you're seeing it? On any of the agricultural crops, right? Anything can bioaccumulate in these compound or these products. PFAS testing has come a long way for where it started, but it's that same thing when it's just like makes me remind me of the cannabis industry. It's like, oh, I have a test. I can test, let's say, THC. Oh, you can test THC. Now you can test THC in every matrix in the world. That's not how that works, guys. We can't just rush it. And then for whatever reason, the cannabis industry, everyone's like, yeah, I can do whatever. One method does everything. It's like, in the PFAS industry, that's not how it works. I own another laboratory outside of the cannabis field because I love analytical chemistry. But we do PFAS testing in various products there. The different matrices can get very difficult to analyze, and especially if we start looking at very, very low concentrations. And that's what PFAS looks at. I mean, you're talking the part per billion, part per trillion level stuff. This is well lower than anything we're looking at in the cannabis industry. But could we run cannabis products and look for PFAS? Yes. Would we probably find it? Sadly, I'm going to guess yes. PFAS is in most things. Depends how low you look. It's the same thing as if you look at agricultural crops and you say, are pesticides in it? Well, how low do you want me to look? You want to look at a part per trillion level? I'm probably going to find pesticides in
it. That does kind of make sense. It's like, how close do you want to look at it? Yeah. And one more comment here from Jamie. I've always been mystified as to why industry doesn't use total yeast in mold if found to be over a particular threshold to trigger a test to identify what is present.
That's one of those things that it's like maybe because I'm not a microbiologist. I have some great microbiologists on my team, and I know there's some great people in this industry. I've always asked that too. It's like when we start looking at general microbials and we start failing things and saying it's unsafe, is that true? I mean, I can't remember which state has APC testing, aerobic count bacteria. I mean, it's a living plant. It's going to have bacteria on it. If it didn't, that'd be amazing. And it probably wouldn't live. So that's one of those things. It's like, I think the step forward, and I applaud anyone doing this work because I know there are people out there. It's really finding the things that could be harmful and then isolating and making sure that those are the things we're looking for. So like speciating and making sure like, hey, is there specific yeast or mold we want to look at? Maybe we develop a test looking at for that, not necessarily a general test and say, hey, is there yeast and mold on this? But like kind of what Jamie said, like, yeah, this is an opinion I've had for a long time. And I think that strives back to I'm an analytical chemist and I like things very exact. Like I want to know I have negative trans delta 9. No one else in the world wants to know that probably, but 24 people. So it's just, yeah, one of those things.
Well, there's 9 people watching right now, so that's it. Almost half.
There they are.
I meant to slap this up. I jumped the gun a little bit. I'm about out of shit here, Josh. I do want to give you the last minute, and I want to thank you for your time first. Thanks again. This has been fascinating. If we missed anything that you think is super important, I know there's a part 3 of the Beard Brothers stories coming up. I'm psyched to see that. But if we missed anything, or if you have any shameless plugs or shout outs you want to give, now's the time. Thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it.
I mean, I appreciate you having me again. Always willing to talk or kind of discuss these things. I would love to be on some of these in the future. If you ever have anything with multiple people, I think that's a good key way. Have a couple of different people with different opinions. I would like to give a shout out to like my lab, my staff members. I'm out in the face of the company, but these people that I work with me are just as passionate as me. It's amazing the people that you get side by side. If you have people that truly care, we all seem to be lining up on the same team and a lot of the other teams. And I've really been blessed to have the people that I work with and the people that I surround myself with. I think there's a lot of us doing the right things and pushing the industry forward. I really would say that if we want to move this industry forward, let's make sure that we don't kill it before we give the opportunity to thrive. We're not there yet. It isn't, even if it's federally legal, the battle isn't over, because I go back to the same thing. If we let this be the thing that caused some kind of illness, it's going to be seen that way. Let's not let contaminants do it. Let's not sit here on our hands and be like, I look for 22 pesticides and 4 solvents. This is a safe product. Guess what? You know who else knows that you're looking for 22 pesticides and 4 solvents? I'm just being facetious. Every producer out there. So guess what? I can look at the list of other thousands of things to use. So unless we really are going to push the industry forward, I'm not saying making everything mandated. I really think states, the government labs should be looking at large expanded lists. If you see extremely dangerous chemicals in these products, you should do something about it. I'm happy to work on that. There's a lot of people out there. So, as an analytical chemist, I always want to make sure we're going to create the safest product we can. So that's my shameless plug, is keep this industry moving forward. Don't stand still. And I'm not trying to make it harder for everyone or make it more expensive to test. I just don't want to see this industry go away, because I think there's so many benefits to having cannabis legal and widely consumed other than other things.
Yeah. Josh Swider, thanks for teaching me how to say your name today. Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs co-founder and CEO. And I'm going to sign it off. I'm your host, Caleb Teskey. Stick around for a minute, Josh, if you would. The devil's in the details, and the details are in the fine print. Peace, guys.